Bumpy Johnson's rival shot his brother in Harlem. What happened in 5 hours made police turn away. The gunfire didn't wait for morning. Bumpy Johnson stepped onto the cracked Harlem sidewalk, eyes narrowing. A brother was bleeding, rival factions moving like shadows, and the streets smelled of threat, calmly, deliberately, waiting for him to act. The alley smelled of gunpowder and wet asphalt. Bumpy Johnson moved through the scattered crowd with a calm that contrasted the chaos. His brother lay on the ground, clutching his side, blood dark against his coat. No crías. Only the low hum of whispered questions and the distant wail of a siren that hadn't yet arrived. Bumpy's eyes scanned every corner, every shadow. Faces froze when he passed, some lowering their gaze, others stiffening in fear. A few men whispered to each other, trying to calculate whether they were safe or next. But Bumpy's presence was a force that required no words. The balance had shifted, respect had sharpened into a blade. He knelt beside his brother, voice low, deliberate. "Hold on," he said. Not a command, not a plea, a statement. One that reminded everyone watching that he measured life and death with patience. His brother's trembling fingers gripped his own for a brief moment before slackening. Bumpy let go. Outside, Harlem watched. Windows framed silent observers. A child clutched a mother's coat, peering around the edge of a doorway. Shopkeepers paused in doorways, the cash register forgotten. Every eye recorded the moment, understanding that violence was possible, but control was absolute. The man who had fired the shots had not yet fled. Bumpy noted the footprints in the wet alley, the angles of escape, the likely accomplices waiting. Every detail mattered. Every hesitation, every twitch, every whispered lie in the shadows would be accounted for. No gun had been drawn. No shadowy. Yet the weight of inevitability pressed down on the alley. Bumpy Johnson's calm was heavier than any weapon, and everyone, friend, foe, and stranger, felt it in the marrow of their bones. Harlem held its breath. Word of the shooting traveled faster than any siren, moving through streets and stoops, whispering from barbershop chairs and stoop conversations. Bumpy Johnson didn't need to speak. His presence alone carried authority, quiet, unwavering, unavoidable. He walked down the cracked sidewalk, coat collar turned up against the chill, hands swinging lightly at his sides. Every footstep measured, every glance deliberate. Children playing in puddles paused mid-laugh, eyes dropping to the street. Shopkeepers leaned against door frames, palms pressed against weathered wood, watching. Even the stray cats and dogs hesitated, sensing the tension that wasn't noise but weight. Bumpy's eyes swept the crowd, noting every reaction, every faltering posture. A man who had lingered too long near the alley slipped silently into the shadows. A woman in a wool coat tucked her child closer, offering a silent nod of respect. Everyone understood. Power didn't always roar. Sometimes it moved through presence alone. Sometimes it demanded attention and silence. He reached the corner where his brother had been shot. The alley behind him was empty now, the dampness gleaming under the overcast light, footprints leading away in neat, purposeful lines. Bumpy's gaze lifted slowly to the fire escapes above, to the windows that framed Harlem's watchers. They recorded everything. His control, his patience, his inevitability. Some whispered to neighbors. Others whispered to themselves. Each word, each half-formed sentence, became part of the city's ledger. Every look at Bumpy, every subtle adjustment of posture, was a mark of allegiance or acknowledgement of who commanded. No one spoke his name aloud. It didn't need to be said. He moved through the street like a tide, steady, inexorable, shaping the neighborhood around him with a quiet, iron hand. The men who had once dared to measure themselves against him now froze in mid-step, calculating risk and consequence. The women who had watched him grow into authority nodded subtly, recognition without fanfare. The children, those who would remember, learned what it meant when a man walked with certainty. Respect is earned, loyalty is sacred, and defiance carries a cost. Bumpy didn't stop. The city moved around him, yet somehow it bent to his pace. Every alley, every stoop, every corner understood the message. Harlem was watching, and so was he. The man who had pulled the trigger didn't hide forever. Bumpy Johnson could feel it in the pulse of the streets, in the nervous shifts of neighbors' eyes, in the way whispers carried from stoop to stoop. Every shadow seemed to hold him. Every corner offered a hint of movement. Harlem was alive with rumor, and rumor had a scent Bumpy could follow. He stepped into a narrow street, wet from a late drizzle, the neon sign of a closed diner flickering faintly above. The rival stood near a lamppost, hands buried in the pockets of a rumpled trench coat, hat tilted low. The man's jaw was tight, a forced calm that didn't reach his eyes. His body leaned, just slightly, testing the ground for advantage, measuring the distance between himself and inevitability. Bumpy didn't hurry. He moved with the precision of someone who understood that speed was not power. Each step was deliberate, filling the space between them with quiet authority. Every passerby, every witness felt the tension coil in the air. A neighbor peered through a window, breath held. A kid in a doorway pressed his face to the glass, small fingers tapping against the pane. Harlem was watching, recording, learning. "You came," the rival said finally, voice low, careful, but carrying that edge of defiance only fear can sharpen. Bumpy didn't answer. He didn't need to. Silence was louder. It stretched across the wet street, bending around them like steel. The man's eyes flicked to Bumpy's hands, noting their stillness, the weight in his posture, the calm in his gaze. He understood. This was not a man who acted without thought, but when he did, it was final. The rival shifted slightly, a step back, a glance toward the alley that led away from the scene of blood earlier. Allies, if any, would already be weighing risk. Bumpy's shadow fell over him slowly, deliberately, unhurried. Every heartbeat was counted. Every pause had consequence. Harlem itself seemed to lean in, listening, witnessing the standoff that needed no gunfire yet. No one else approached. The street was empty but for them and the watching eyes. Bumpy's reputation filled the space. His control was palpable. Even the damp, cold air seemed to bend toward him, carrying the lesson that betrayal carried weight. The rival tried to smile, weak, uneven, a flicker of arrogance that failed under Bumpy's scrutiny. In that instant, the decision was made, though nothing had yet moved. Power did not announce itself. It was observed. The lesson, when delivered, would echo through every corner of Harlem, and Bumpy Johnson would be the one to write it. The streets of Harlem had narrowed. Every alley, every stoop, every storefront seemed to lean in toward the scene. Bumpy Johnson moved with measured steps, careful not to disturb the weight in the air. The rain had stopped, leaving slick asphalt that reflected the muted light of street lamps. The city watched, silent but aware. Police had arrived, but they lingered at the edges, uncertain. Their sirens had long faded, leaving only the tension that had already settled over the neighborhood. They knew, without being told, that this was not a scene to intervene in. This was Harlem's code, and Bumpy's hand was already on the ledger of consequence. Neighbors pressed against windows, faces pale in the flicker of neon and tungsten lamps. A child's voice quivered somewhere in the distance, quickly hushed by a mother's hand. Men in wool coats and fedoras shifted their weight, gauging whether to linger or disappear into shadows. All eyes were drawn toward Bumpy, noting his slow, deliberate stride. No panique, no hast, just control that carried an unspoken warning. Watch closely, but do not interfere. He passed the alley where his brother had been shot. The damp brick walls reflected the faint shimmer of puddles, each step echoing quietly. Footprints marked the path of the rival who had dared to test him. Bumpy observed them all, the angles, the depth, the direction. Every movement mattered. Every hesitation told story. The rival had not vanished entirely. From a corner, he watched, attempting to measure the distance between himself and inevitability. Bumpy's shadow fell across the street again, an invisible weight that pressed against him, reminding him that no one in Harlem acted without consequence. Friends of the rival lingered nearby, uncertain, calculating risk and loyalty. Some would side silently with Bumpy. Others would rethink their alliances entirely. The air itself seemed heavier now. The city had slowed, acknowledging the gravity of what was unfolding. A barbershop shutter rattled in the faint wind. A cat hissed and disappeared, and the soft drip of water from a fire escape punctuated the stillness. Every observer felt the lesson. Betrayal was possible, but so was judgment. Bumpy's authority did not need guns to enforce it. It did not need shouting. It only needed presence, patience, and inevitability. He paused at the corner, turning slightly to note every figure in the street. His eyes met the rivals for a brief moment. No words exchanged, only the quiet recognition that the reckoning would be precise, deliberate, and final. Harlem absorbed the tension like a sponge, understanding that the hours ahead would define respect, fear, and loyalty for years to come. Even the officers remained at a careful distance, pens poised but silent. They knew, somehow, that this was not theirs to resolve. The city had its own laws tonight, and Bumpy Johnson was both judge and enforcer. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of a single overhead light and the faint creak of the floorboards beneath Bumpy Johnson's polished shoes. Outside, Harlem slept uneasily, the echoes of earlier chaos lingering in wet streets and darkened alleys. Inside, time moved differently, slower, heavier, inevitable. His rival sat across the small table, the envelope of betrayal still clutched loosely in one hand, the other trembling ever so slightly. He tried to straighten, tried to summon confidence, but it was a veneer that Bumpy could see through in an instant. Every twitch, every hesitant breath betrayed the fear simmering beneath. Bumpy's gaze was steady, deliberate. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture violently. Power, he knew, was not in noise. It was in control, in inevitability, in the silent certainty that the choice and the consequence rested in his hands. "You understand why I'm here," Bumpy said, voice calm, measured, each word slicing through the tension like a scalpel. Not a threat, not a question, a declaration. The man's lips pressed into a thin line, nodding once, dryly, without conviction. The poison waited, hidden in plain sight, a shadow of inevitability rather than a spectacle. Harlem had taught Bumpy patience. The city had taught him restraint. Every street corner, every friend, every whispered warning had honed his understanding. Fear does not need volume. Authority does not demand panic. Respect is earned in moments like this, when the world watches and the hand that delivers judgment moves without hesitation. The rival's eyes flicked to the envelope, to the glass on the table, to the subtle tilt of Bumpy's head. Recognition dawned. He understood without speaking. His betrayal was measured, accounted for, and final. Every heartbeat stretched. Silence pressed, unyielding, unbroken, until inevitability became motion. Bumpy moved once. Smooth, controlled, deliberate. The act was over before it was noticed. Quiet correction, a necessary lesson. No screams, no chows, just the still, heavy knowledge that betrayal had been repaid in full. He straightened his jacket, glanced toward the door, and left. Harlem's streets exhaled, their tension released, but their respect renewed. The city had observed. The lesson was absorbed. Power, calm, and authority had been reaffirmed without a shout. By morning, Harlem had remembered. The streets whispered the story in fragments. The betrayal, the calm, the inevitability. No one needed to speak Bumpy Johnson's name aloud. Everyone knew who had acted and who had learned the cost of crossing him. He walked the avenues slowly, deliberately. The damp asphalt mirrored his measured steps. Children paused in their games, glances flicking to him, learning lessons in silence. Shopkeepers nodded subtly from doorways, a recognition heavier than words. Every gesture, every glance carried acknowledgement. Loyalty is sacred, and power can be quiet but absolute. The rival was gone, a ghost erased from the rhythm of the streets. Those who had lingered near him before now shifted uneasily, recalculating allegiances. Friends and neighbors absorbed the lesson without celebration, understanding that respect is earned through control, not spectacle. Bumpy's authority had been reaffirmed, and the city itself had watched, learned, and filed the event into memory. Bumpy paused at the corner of his brother's favorite stoop. The neighborhood had changed subtly overnight, not in buildings, not in signs, but in awareness. Every alley, every stoop, every shadow now carried a silent respect for him. The weight of responsibility, of legacy, pressed lightly yet firmly upon his shoulders. He understood it. Harlem understood it. He didn't boast. He didn't linger. He moved with the same calm that had carried him through every test, every betrayal, every moment that demanded quiet authority. Power was not in violence alone. It was in restraint, in measured decisions, in letting the city itself witness the lesson unfold. Even the officers who had watched from the edges now left, uncertain of their jurisdiction, powerless in the presence of Harlem's own code. The neighborhood had recorded the final truth. Betrayal comes at a price, respect endures, and Bumpy Johnson decides when balance is restored. As he disappeared into the morning haze, the city continued its rhythm around him. The lesson would last longer than memory, carried in glances, nods, and whispers for years to come. Harlem would never forget the quiet power of a man who moved with authority, patience, and inevitability.